Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So last class we took the statement of the author alayhi rahmatullah, where he said, وَالْإِيمَانُ بِالرُّؤْيَةِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ يَرَوْنَ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ بِأَعْيُنِ رُؤُوسِهِمْ وَهُوَ يُحَاسِبُهُمْ بِلَا حَاجِبٍ وَلَا تُرْجُمَانٍ. So the statement of the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam al-Barbahārī, he said, and to believe in seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. They will see Allah Azza wa Jal with their eyes, with their physical eyes, meaning the believers. And He will take them into account, and there will not be a partition or a screen between them and Allah, nor an interpreter. So, in the explanation, very quickly, just a recap, Shaykh Fawzan, he mentioned that this issue right here, in terms of the believers seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, this is a very important topic that's connected to our creed. It's an extremely important topic. So much so that the scholars of the past and even the scholars of Sharhus-Sunnah in the present time, they mention this issue. It's connected to our creed, that the believers will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. And we mentioned the speech of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, as well as Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, when it came to the issue of the person who denies the believers being able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. Very quickly, for those who are here, what's the ruling? If a person says that Allah, أن الله لا يرى في الآخرة ما حكمه, a person says Allah is not going to be seen in the hereafter, what's his ruling? It's disbelief. What was the detail that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah mentioned? What's the detail? If a person is ignorant and he's just repeating what he's heard from his imam or his shaykh, and he says Allah is not going to be seen in the hereafter, no one can see Allah, not in this life nor the hereafter, and he's ignorant, is he to be declared a disbeliever automatically like that? So what's the detail? That's not the detail. Huh? No, هو جاهل. يعلم. If a person is ignorant, he's to be taught. If a person truly doesn't know better, he's to be taught. He's to be informed. A person mentions the proofs and the evidences from the Book of Allah or the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that establish that the believers will in fact see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. If a person, for example, after that, after the proofs and the evidences are established, and he is persistent and he says, I don't believe in that, I still say that the believers are not going to see Allah in the hereafter, then at that point what happens? At that point, that's kufr. That's major disbelief. It takes a person outside of the fold of Islam. So it's a very serious issue. It's not something that's light. And we mentioned, or Shaykh Fawzan, he mentioned numerous verses from the Quran that establish that the believers will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For those who are here, who recalls any of the verses or the meaning of the verse, is numerous verses. وجوه يومئذ ناظرة إلى ربها ناظرة in Surah al-Qiyamah. On that day, some faces will be radiant. They will be shining, looking at their Lord. What's another verse? In Surah al-Mutaffifin, in Juz Amma. نعم. With regard to the disbelievers, كلا إنهم عن ربهم يومئذ لمحجوبون. Nay, or no, rather they will be screened from seeing their Lord on that day. And this is with regard to the disbelievers. And Imam al-Shafi'i and other scholars have said this verse is a proof that the believers will be able to see their Lord. The fact that the disbelievers will not be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter as a punishment, this is a proof in itself indirectly, that the believers will be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, he mentioned the verse, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَ وَزِيَادَةً. For those who do good, they shall have good and extra. What was intended by extra? نعم النظر إلى وجه الله سبحانه وتعالى, looking at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is with regard to the believers. So today, or tonight, بإذن الله, Sheikh Fawzan, he's going to mention some doubts that the people of innovation try to come with to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be seen in the hereafter. So the Shaykh, he says, وَمِنَ الشُّبَهِ التي اعتمد عليها المعتزلة ومن قال بقولهم أن الله قال لموسى لن تراني في قوله ولما جاء موسى لميقاتنا وكلمه ربه قال ربي أرني أنظر إليك. So one of the doubts that the Mu'tazila and those who have a similar view, they rely upon is that they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Musa, لَن تَرَانِي, you will not be able to see me. And this is in the statement of Allah, the meaning of the verse. And when Musa alayhi salam came to the time and the place that was appointed by us, and his Lord spoke to him, his Lord spoke directly to him. قَالَ رَبِّي أَرِنِي أَنظُرْ إِلَيْكَ. Musa alayhi salam said, my Lord, let me show me yourself so that I can look at you. قَالَ لَن تَرَانِي. Allah said, you're not going to be able to see me. لَن تَرَانِي. And this word right here, the Shaykh is going to elaborate on it. لَن. You're not going to be able to see me. وَلَكِنِ انظُرْ إِلَى الْجَبَلِ فَإِنِ اسْتَقَرَّ مَكَانَهُ فَسَوْفَ تَرَانِي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, however, look to this mountain. Look at this mountain, and if it stays in its place, then you will be able to see me. قالوا وَهَذَا دَلِيلٌ عَلَىٰ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُرَى. So the Mu'tazila, Ahlul Bid'ah, who hold the same view, they say this verse is a proof that Allah will not be seen in the hereafter. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَن تَرَانِي, you're not going to be able to see me. نَقُولْ نَعَمْ هَذَا فِي الدُّنْيَا. So we say, yes, this is with regard to this world. لِأَنَّ الْوَاقِعَةُ هَذِهِ حَصَلَتْ فِي الدُّنْيا. Because this occurrence, or this situation that took place, this happened in this dunya. When Musa alayhi salam asked Allah, قَالَ رَبِّي أَرِنِي أَنظُرْ إِلَيْكَ. He was in this dunya. Let me look at you. This took place in this dunya. نَحْنُ مُتَّفِقُونَ عَلَىٰ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُرَى فِي الدُّنْيا. So we are in agreement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be seen in this world. فَمُوسَى سَأَلَ أَنْ يَرَاهُ فِي الدُّنْيا. So Musa alayhi salam, he asked Allah to let him see him in this world. قال الله جل وعلا قال لن تراني. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you're not going to be able to see me. يعني في الدنيا. This is very clear. This is very clear. Meaning in this world. وَالنَّفْيُ بِلَنْ لَا يَقْتَضِي التَّأْبِيدِ. And this goes back to the Arabic language. So this word len, you will not, it does not necessitate that this is forever. It's not a negation to show that this is forever, that you will not be able to see me forever. بَلْ هُوَ نَفْيٌ مُؤَقَّتٌ. Rather, this is a negation that is temporary. It's a temporary negation. فهو قال لن تراني يعني لن تراني في الدنيا. So he said, you will not be able to see me, meaning in this world. وفي لغة العرب أن النفي بلن لا يقتضي التأبيد. So in the Arabic language, the word len, right, it does not carry the meaning or necessitate that this negation is forever. ولهذا يقول ابن مالك في الكافية الشافية في النحو ومن يرى النفي بلن مؤبدا فقوله اردد وسواه فاعضدا. He said, Ibn Malik and al-Kafiyah al-Shafiyah, and this is regarding the Arabic language, whoever holds the view that the negation of len, in the Arabic language, len is used to negate something for the future. So whoever holds the view that the negation with len is forever, then his statement is rejected. وَسِوَاهُ فَعْضُدَ. and other than this is to be supported. أي أن لن لا تقتضي النفي المؤبد. So this means that the word len, it does not necessitate a negation forever. والدليل أيضا أن الله قال في اليهود أن الله قال في اليهود. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is also another proof. Allah, He said regarding the Yahud, فَتَمَنَّوُا الْمَوْتَ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And hope for death if you are truthful. وَلَن يَتَمَنَّوْهُ أَبَدًا. And they will never hope for death. They will never hope for death. مع أنه جاء أنهم في الآخرة يتمنون الموت ليستريحوا من العذاب. However, it comes that in the hereafter, they're going to hope for death. They're going to wish that they could die so that they could get some rest or a break from the punishment they're in. It comes in another verse, وَيَقُولُ الْكَافِرُ يَا لَيْتَنِي كُنْتُ تُرَابًا. And the disbeliever on that day, he's going to say, woe is me, if only I was dust. If only I was dust. He mentions another verse. قال تعالى وَنَادَوْا يَا مَالِكُ لِيَقْضِي عَلَيْنَا رَبُّكَ. And they will call out to Malik, and this is the gatekeeper of the hellfire, the angel that is in charge of the hellfire. The inhabitants of the hellfire are going to call out to him. They're going to say, Malik, let your Lord put it into us. طَلَبُ الْمَوْتِ. طَلَبُ الْمَوْتِ. They're going to ask for death. They're going to ask for death. So the shahid, or the point, goes back to the verse that the Shaykh initially mentioned, وَلَن يَتَمَنَّوْهُ أَبَدًا. They're not going to hope for death. In the hereafter, because of the punishment and the horror that the disbelievers are going to experience, they're going to wish that they die. No one's going to want to stay alive. But in the hereafter, as we all know, there's no death. And there, if a person is being punished, in reality, that's not really life either. ثُمَّ لَا يَمُوتُ فِيهَا وَلَا يَحْيَا. And then therein, they're not going to die, nor they're going to live. Right? If a person is in that state, he's constantly being punished, he's going to wish that he could die. But he's not going to be able to die. عِيَاذٍ بِاللَّهِ. So the Shaykh, he says, فَدَلَّ عَلَىٰ أَنَّ لَنْ لَيْسَتْ لِلنَّفْيِ الْمُؤَبَّدِ. So this indicates and shows that len is not a negation forever. هذا هو مقتضى اللغة العربية. This is what is necessitated in the Arabic language. وهو مقتضى ما دل عليه القرآن. And this is what is necessitated by the Quran. So what's the first doubt? The first doubt that they mention is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Musa alayhi salam, لَن تَرَانِي. You will not be able to see me. So what's the response to that? This is in the dunya. This is with regard to the dunya. This is important. It's not just merely, that we hear these doubts, because the reality is people will come to you with these same doubts. The people of the past, with their deviations, are the same individuals today when they come with doubts and deviation. They have the same objective, and they have the same methodology when it comes to spreading their doubts. So it's important for us, as people who are upon the sunnah, to know how to respond to their doubts. So the first doubt that's mentioned is that they say, Allah told Musa, لَن تَرَانِي. You will not be able to see me. So the response to that is what? That's with regard to this dunya. That's with regard to this dunya. قالوا أيضا. So this is another doubt. مما يدل على أن الله لا يرى قوله لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار. So they also said that which shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be seen in the hereafter is the statement of Allah, the meaning of the verse, and the vision or the sight cannot encompass him, but he encompasses all of the sights or all of the vision. نقول لهم. So we say to them, هذا ليس نفيا للرؤيا. This is not a negation of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. وإنما هو نفي للإدراك. But rather this is a negation of encompassing. This is a negation of grasping. ما قال لا تراه الأبصار. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say that the eyes cannot see him. قال لا تدركه. He said that the sight or the vision cannot encompass him. وَنَفْيُ الْإِدْرَاكِ غَيْرُ نَفْيِ الرُّؤْيَةِ. So the negation of encompassing is not the same as the negation of seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَالْأَبْصَارُ تَرَاهُ لَكِنَّهَا لَا تُدْرِكُهُ يعني لا تحيط به. So the vision or the eyes can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, but they cannot encompass him. They cannot grasp him. فالإدراك هو الإحاطة بالله جل وعلا. So we just mentioned this. This is to grasp or encompass Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فهم وإن رأوه في الجنة لا يحيطون به سبحانه وتعالى. So even if the inhabitants of paradise can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in paradise, they cannot encompass or grasp Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فالمنفي هو الإدراك الذي بمعنى الإحاطة. So the negation that's being referred to here is to encompass or grasp Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فهي تراه لكنها لا تدركه. So the vision or the eyes can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, but they cannot encompass him. And the next point that the Shaykh is going to mention is very important. Abdul Rahman. The next point that's going to be mentioned is very important. He says, لَكِنَّهَا تَرَاهُ بِمُوجِبِ الْأَدِلَّةِ. However, the eyes will be able to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based upon what's necessitated from the proofs and the evidences. وَالْجَمْعُ بَيْنَ النُّصُوصِ هُوَ الْوَاجِبِ. To reconcile between the different texts from the Quran and the Sunnah is obligatory. إذا حصل شيء من الاختلاف بين النصوص فمهما أمكن الجمع فيجمع بينها. So this point, pay attention to it. If there is a contradiction, or it seems to be a contradiction when it comes to the text in the Quran or in the Sunnah, if there seems to be a contradiction, then whenever there's a possibility to reconcile between them, then that's what has to be done. وَهَذَا وَاضِحٌ وَلِلَّهِ الْحَمْدِ. And this is clear, and all praises for Allah. وَكَلَامُ اللَّهِ لَا يَتَنَاقَضُ أَبَدًا. Right? There's never any contradictions when it comes to the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. بَلْ يُفَسِّرُ بَعْضُهُ بَعْضًا. Rather, the Quran, it explains itself. The Quran, some portions of the Quran explains other portions. أما الذي يأخذ آية ويترك الآية الأخرى فهذا من أهل الزيغ. But if a person was to take a verse, and unfortunately a lot of people do this, they'll run with a verse, but then they'll leave off another verse that is giving detail and elaborating upon that initial verse. Then this person is from Ahl al-Zayg. Right? This person has deviation within inside of him. قال تعالى, Allah Ta'ala said, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ ابْتِغَاءَ الْفِتْنَةِ وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِهِ. As for those who have deviation within their hearts, then they follow that which is not clear. They follow those verses that are not clear. Seeking, what's their objective? Why do they do this? Seeking fitna, trials and tribulations, and they seek a false interpretation. فَالْقُرْآنِ يُسْتَدَلُّ بِهِ كُلِّهِ. So the Quran, the entirety of the Quran is used as a proof and evidence. كُلُّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. All of it is from our Lord. كَمَا يَقُولُ الرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. This is what the people who are grounded in knowledge say. فَيُفَسِّرُ الْقُرْآنِ بَعْضُهُ بَعْضًا. So the Quran, it explains itself. It explains itself. وَلَا يَخْتَلِفُ أَبَدًا. And it does not contradict itself. The Quran, it does not contradict itself. لأن الله نفى عنه الاختلاف. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has negated that the Quran contradicts itself. قال تعالى, Allah Ta'ala said, أفلا يتدبرون القرآن ولو كان من عند غير الله لوجدوا فيه اختلافا كثيرا. The meaning of the verse, do they not contemplate and reflect upon the Quran? And had the Quran came from other than Allah, then they will find much contradiction therein. if a person was to pick up the Bible, and for example, he picks up the Old Testament, and he compares it to the New Testament, you're going to find contradictions throughout it. You're going to find contradictions throughout it. Because this is the work of people. People have altered the original Injil that was revealed to Isa alayhi salam. This is not the case with the Quran. And this is why a person can travel to wherever in this dunya, right? They can travel to China, Russia, wherever. The same Quran that's being recited here in America is the same Quran that's being recited in other countries. The Quran, walillah alhamd, it has not been changed from the time that it was revealed to Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam until this very day. So there's no contradictions in the Quran. The next point, the Shaykh, he mentions a very important point. He says, إِذَا أَشْكَلَتْ عَلَيْكَ آيَةٌ فَإِنَّكَ تَلْتَمِسُ فِي الْقُرْآنِ مَا يُفَسِّرُهَا. So this is what you're supposed to do. For example, you're reading the Quran and you come across a verse. You come across a particular verse. And what's apparent to you is that there's a contradiction. This verse, for example, it seems to contradict another verse that you know of in the Quran. So what are you supposed to do in that situation? He said, if there is a verse in the Quran and it's problematic, I mean, it causes you an issue, for example, or it seems to be problematic, then you're supposed to look in the Quran itself. You're supposed to search in the Quran itself to find a verse that explains it. That's where you start. And this is why you find the scholars of Ahl-Sunnah, the Mufassirun, like Ibn Kathir, Imam al-Sa'di, and others, when they explain the Quran, how do they explain the Quran? They explain first starting with the Quran itself. After that, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدْ فَإِنَّكَ تَذْهَبُ إِلَى السُّنَّةِ تَجِدْ فِي السُّنَّةِ مَا يُفَسِّرَهَا. So if you don't find another verse that explains that particular verse that seems like it's a contradiction or it might be problematic, what are you supposed to do after that? Go to the Sunnah. Go to the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sunnah is also wahy. It's revelation revealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the second thing. So if a person doesn't find in the Sunnah that which explains a verse that seems like it's contradicting another verse, or it seems like it might be problematic, or whatever the case is, what are you supposed to do if you don't find in the Sunnah that which explains that verse? Ahsant. Naam. So after that, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدْ في السنة ما يفسرها فإنك تذهب إلى أقوال الصحابة الذين رووا عن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. So after that, if you don't find in the Sunnah that which explains that verse that might seem problematic or as a contradiction or whatever the case is, if you don't find in the Sunnah that which explains it, then you go to the statements of the Sahaba who narrated from the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم. تجد في أقوالهم ما يفسر الآية التي أشكلت عليك. You're going to find in the speech of the Sahaba that which explains the verse that seemed problematic to you. القرآن ولله الحمد محفوظ في لفظه وفي معناه. The Quran ولله الحمد, it is preserved in terms of its wording and its meaning. لا يتعارض ولا يتناقض. Right? There's no contradiction. There's no contradiction. إنما التعارض في أفهام البشر. The contradiction is only in people's understanding. It's only in a person's understanding. And this is why, especially like for people who try to go in the field of da'wah, whether they have a platform on social media, whatever the case is, a person has to be grounded. Right? We're not saying necessarily a person has to be a scholar, but a person does have to be grounded. Because there's a lot of Christians, for example, who do debates with Muslims. They're well known for it. And one of the things that they do when they do these debates, is that they'll mention a verse from the Quran and they'll say that this verse, it contradicts this verse, or it contradicts what your prophet said. Or your prophet said such and such, but the Quran is saying something else. So if a person isn't knowledgeable when it comes to an-nasikh wal-mansukh, for example, things that have been abrogated and those verses that abrogated it, or even with regard to the Sunnah, then a person, he's going to embarrass himself. And he could be a reason for people going astray. If other people are listening to you and they're Muslim initially, and then they listen to you, and that Christian who is debating that Muslim, he seems like he has a stronger argument, you could be a reason for a Muslim and other Muslims going astray. So this is extremely important. A person has to be grounded. The Shaykh, he says, وَكَذَلِكَ الْمُتَعَالِمُونَ الَّذِينَ لَمْ يَدْرُسُوا الْعِلْمِ وَلَمْ يَأْخُذُوا قَوَاعِدَ الْإِسْتِدْلَالِ وَالْمَدَارِكِ. And this is another very important point. He says, likewise, al-muta'alimun, right? People who act like they have knowledge. We'll say they're phonies. Right? In this day and time, for example, and this is in dunya terms, right? You have a lot of people, they go to YouTube and, they get their information from the internet, and they act like, for example, like they are expert when it comes to herbs. Right? You should take this. A brother gets sick, and then he, all of a sudden, he acting like he studied in China for 20 years and, he knows Chinese medicine, all this. Listen, if a person knows something he studied, that's one thing. That's one thing. But for a person to put on a facade and act like he's something that he's not, and this is not praiseworthy, even when it comes to dunya affairs. So how much more so when it comes to the religion? He says, as for al-muta'alimun, the people who are phonies, imposters, they act like they have knowledge, and they didn't study, and they didn't learn the principles of deductions, making deductions when it comes to the text. يَسْتَدِلُّونَ بِلَا فِقْهٍ. Right? They make their deductions without understanding. وَيُثْبِتُونَ أَشْيَاءَ مَا أَثْبَتَهَا قَبْلَهُمْ أَحَدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ. And look how dangerous this is. These individuals who didn't learn, they are phonies, they're imposters when it comes to knowledge. They affirm things that the scholars before them did not affirm. بِسَبَبِ الْجَهْلِ وَتَعَالُمْ. Because of ignorance and because of putting on this facade and acting like they're scholars. The well-known statement of Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah ta'ala, we mentioned this statement numerous times, where he said, إِيَّاكَ أَن تَتَكَلَّمَ فِي مَسْأَلَةٍ لَيْسَ لَكَ فِيهَا إِمَامٍ. Beware of speaking about an Islamic issue and you don't have no scholar preceding you. You have no scholar preceding you. If the scholars in the past didn't speak about the issue that, for example, a person is talking about, he's telling people, this is the interpretation of the Quran, or this is the interpretation of this verse, and no scholar in the past ever said anything like that, then do you think that it's possible for a person in 1446, 2025 to come with something that the Salaf didn't beat us to? It's not possible. It's not possible. But this is the end result of ignorance and putting on a facade and acting like a person has knowledge. هذه القضايا عظيمة. These issues are extremely important. تحتاج إلى تعلم وإلى دقة وإلى ترو وإلى تثبت. Right? These issues, they require knowledge, precision, consideration, and تثبت. يعني verification. لأن العقيدة هي الأصل. Because the foundation is the creed. وأي خلل فيها فهو خلل في الأصل. And if a person has this deficiency when it comes to his creed, then in reality he has deficiency when it comes to his foundation. فهذا حاصل خلاف الناس في رؤية الله عز وجل يوم القيامة. So this is a summary of the differing that the people have as it relates to seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. فالله لا يرى في الدنيا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not going to be seen in this world. وَإِنَّمَا يَرَاهُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. وَإِنَّمَا يَرَاهُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. But rather the believers will only see Him in the hereafter. وَيُحْجَبُ عَنْهُ الْكَافِرُونَ. And the disbelievers will be veiled from seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قَوْلُهُ وَالْإِيمَانُ بِالرُّؤْيَةِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. And his statement, rahimahullah, and believing in seeing Allah on the day of judgment. Why did he say Yawm al-Qiyamah? Believing in seeing Allah on the day of judgment. What's the reason that why he added Yawm al-Qiyamah? Now, because he's not seen in the after, in this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be seen in this world. That's the reason why he added يوم القيامة. قوله يرون الله عز وجل بأعين رؤوسهم. And his statement, they will see Allah with their physical eyes. قال بأعين رؤوسهم نفيا لتأويل الذين يقولون معنى يرون ربهم أي بقلوبهم. And the reason why he said this, بأعين رؤوسهم, يعني with their physical eyes, you're going to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their physical eyes, is to negate that false interpretation that some people say, that the meaning of they will see their Lord is that they will see their Lord with their hearts. It's almost like the Nation of Islam, may Allah guide them to Islam, where they say in the hereafter, they say when a person dies, there's no physical resurrection. They say it's no physical resurrection, but they say it's a mental, or they say it's a mental resurrection. All right, so when a person dies, according to the Nation of Islam, they say you're not going to physically come back to life, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have established. They say it's going to be a mental resurrection, because they say the black man this is what he's most in need of, right? As though the black man is the only one that's going to be resurrected, right? It's foolishness. But this is the same. It's ta'wil batil, right? It's a false interpretation. It's foolishness. So what's implied is that they will physically see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their eyes, not with their hearts. قوله وهو يحاسبهم بلا حاجب ولا ترجمان. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take them into account without a partition and without an interpreter. أي في يوم القيامة عند الحساب يخلو العبد بربه. So on the day of judgment, and when we read this, you have to really think about it. This is not a fairy tale or something made up. This is something that we're going to experience. He says on the day of judgment, when a person is being taken into account, he's going to be alone with his Lord. He's going to be secluded. Nobody's going to be with him. It's just going to be yourself and your deeds. وَيُحَاسِبُهُ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ أَعْمَالِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take him into account for his deeds بِلُغَتِهِ الَّتِي يَفْهَمُهَا الْعَبْدِ. So when Allah is taking a person into account, if a person spoke English in this dunya, then he's going to speak to that person in the same language in which he understands. If a person spoke Arabic, he spoke Swahili, whatever language he spoke, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, it's not like when a person goes to the court and you're from another country and you don't know the language, or you can't speak proficiently, right? They give you an interpreter. They give you somebody to translate on your behalf, right? That's not the case on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to take a person into account for his deeds in the language in which he understands. لَيْسَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَهُ تُرْجُمَانٍ. There's not going to be any translator between them. التُرْجُمَانِ هو الذي ينقل المعنى من لغة إلى لغة أخرى. And it's well known what an interpreter is. He is the one who conveys the meaning from one language to another. كالذي ينقل المعنى من اللغة الإنجليزية إلى اللغة العربية أو العكس. Like the one who conveys the meaning from the English language to the Arabic language, or the opposite. لأن اللغات كثيرة, because there are many languages. And this is the end of the explanation for this point. And inshallah, the next point is with regard to believing in the mizan, the weighing of the deeds, the good and the bad. So we'll suffice with this, inshallah. وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.